Is there really a balance between regulation and liberty? Probably at present the answer is no, and SpaceX's case is a typical example. It is true that SpaceX has grown to where it is today thanks to government support. However, once that development goes beyond the scope of government regulation and control, it's time to restrain it. And if you're wondering how to do that, in my observation, using bureaucracy as a trap is always the ideal choice. That's what SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell cryptically revealed in her latest tweet. Find out everything in today's Techmap episode. But before we begin, let's subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the latest space news. While the U.S. national election is coming closer, the tension between SpaceX and the Red Tape Party has been hotter than ever. In recent months, the story of the regulatory conflicts between them has made headlines all around the world. Regarding Starship Flight 5 and 2 Falcon launches last year, on Monday, September 30th, the US Federal Aviation Administration again suggested another investigation for SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, which had launched Dragon's Crew 9 mission on Saturday, September 28th. As the FAA announced, SpaceX must investigate why the second stage of its workhorse Falcon 9 rocket malfunctioned after a NASA astronaut mission on Saturday. After sending 2 astronauts to the International Space Station for NASA, the booster experienced an off-nominal deorbit burn, making the second stage safely land in the ocean, but outside of the targeted area. This is the third time in 3 months. The workhorse rocket is grounded for investigation. Fortunately, like 2 previous ones, the latest anomaly didn't cause any public injury or property damage, and the astronaut crew docked the ISS safely. Therefore, many people believe that SpaceX Falcon 9 will be back to launch soon, and SpaceX also manifests its friendly cooperation with the regulator through a post on X. "We will resume launching after we better understand root cause." The mildness of this issue is almost the exact opposite of what the company endured around mid-September. At that point, Starship's important Flight 5 was ready to fly, but a surprising FAA announcement required them to wait until November, probably after the U.S. national election, at the earliest to conduct the test. This is a move that SpaceX criticizes as not based on a new safety concern, but instead driven by superfluous environmental analysis. The most notable consideration listed by the FAA is the permit for operating Starship's water deluge system. The hardware has operated in Starbase for over a year, but now has recently become the target for fines, especially since the CNBC article in August, saying SpaceX was discharging deluge water without TCEQ authorization and polluting the environment. SpaceX pushed back, saying their system only uses clean drinking water and is monitored closely with no harmful contaminants found. Afterward, SpaceX President and Chief Operating Officer Gwynne Shotwell also enters the battle, calling regulators' actions against the company nonsense. As part of a panel of members from the Texas Space Commission, Shotwell told the House Appropriations Committee that SpaceX hasn't had specific issues with Texas regulators, but has with federal entities. "We work very closely with organizations such as the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality," she said. "You may have read a little bit of nonsense in the papers recently about that, but we're working quite well with them." Indeed, on its website, SpaceX confirmed they were operating in good faith under a multi-sector general permit under the supervision of the TCEQ. TCEQ officials were physically present at the first testing of the deluge system and given the opportunity to observe operations around the launch. Shotwell maintained that the system, which she said resembles an upside-down shower head, was licensed and permitted by TCEQ.
"We built this kind of upside-down shower head to basically cool the flame as the rocket was lifting off. That was licensed and permitted by TCEQ.
However, TCEQ has not confirmed giving SpaceX permission for it, which led to $3,750 fines at the end of August for operating Starship's Launchpad water deluge system without the proper permits. The state agency has said the company received a stormwater permit, a type that's usually quickly approved, but did not have the permit required for the discharge of industrial wastewater produced by launches. That type of permit requires significant technical review and usually takes almost a year to to approve. This should not be confused with the $148,300 fine on September imposed on SpaceX by the EPA. This ruling also noted a lack of required water permits for each of the 7 water deluge activations between 2023 and 2024, plus another separate liquid oxygen spill in 2022. It means SpaceX should apply for an individual discharge permit for each activation, even though they affirm their operation has little to nothing in common with industrial waste discharges covered by individual permits, and they applied for that type of permit pretty much later, in July 2024. At this point, I wonder why the EPA didn't warn SpaceX, or even fine them sooner, in the period between 2023 and 2024 when the water deluge activations were happening. It's similar to the story of 2 Falcon 2023 launches, where basically the company told the FAA about all changes in advance, and the FAA didn't make them stop. It's ironic that the federal agency is now reusing the same story to fine SpaceX. Explaining this attack, Shotwell said that after TCEQ licensed and permitted the water deluge system, the EPA came in and didn't like that license or that permit, and wanted to turn it into a federal permit, which SpaceX is working on right now. In conclusion, there was dissent over paperwork between 2 national agencies, TCEQ and the EPA, and a private company like SpaceX is a direct victim of that confusion. The firm believed their activity was covered under one of the generalized permits licensed by TCEQ, but in fact the regulations are much more complicated. As you know, they also need a federal permit including individual permits for each water deluge activation. Perhaps they misunderstood, or it's possible that they were provided with bad information by someone at the Texas regulator. The FAA and EPA also failed to warn SpaceX in time, and now they are using those reasons to continuously attack SpaceX. In contrast to some old space bodies operating under the cost-plus contract, preferring delay and cost overrun, new space like SpaceX are too afraid of bureaucracy. It is perceived as a hindrance to the rapid growth and innovation in the aerospace sector. America is being smothered by ever larger mountains of irrational regulations from ever more new agencies that serve no purpose apart from the aggrandizement of bureaucrats. Elon Musk wrote on X, as the pioneer in the wave of commercial spaceflight toward the ultimate goal to explore other planets in our solar system and beyond, SpaceX is flying at an unprecedented pace as the world's most active launch services provider. SpaceX is also safely and reliably launching astronauts, satellites, and other payloads on missions. To make multiplanetary life a reality, SpaceX has invested a lot of money, time, and effort into its greatest brainchild, Starship. Every flight of Starship has made tremendous progress and accomplished increasingly difficult test objectives, making the entire system more capable and more reliable. In its 5th test flight, the company will reach a new level, attempt to return the Super Heavy booster to the launch site, and catch it in mid-air. This will be a singular novel operation in the history of rocketry. The flight will be a major stepping stone for critical national missions, such as returning astronauts to the moon for NASA's Artemis program. NASA has selected SpaceX's Starship vehicle as the human-rated lander to ferry astronauts between lunar orbit and the moon's south pole for the first 2 Artemis crew landings, expected sometime later this decade. Therefore, Starship needs to be operational as soon as possible, and the early-stage test flights are important for proving the rocket's reliability and testing more complex technologies, such as in-space refueling, required to make the Artemis lunar landings possible. From a broader perspective, our rival China aims to land its astronauts on the moon by 2030, and NASA Administrator Bill Nelson wants U.S. astronauts to return to the lunar surface first. We certainly understand and appreciate the importance of beating China to the moon. Kevin Coleman, FAA's Associate Administrator for Space Transportation, told lawmakers recently, "We just had a conversation recently with NASA leadership where that was re-emphasized. Our commitment certainly is to support this industry and our nation in getting to the moon before China. Unfortunately, regulatory reviews are obviously detrimental to national goals by directly delaying Starship test flights as well as the whole SpaceX operation. It's unacceptable, and large U.S. agencies like the FAA should learn to make the regulations be in harmony with the U.S. government's national security and foreign policy interests." And that just about wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Gwynne Shotwell is the president and chief operating officer of SpaceX and is responsible for day-to-day operations, including production, launch, sales, mission management, and finance, as well as managing all customer and strategic relations to support the company. In short, she's in charge of selling rockets and dealing with Elon Musk. Shotwell is widely regarded as the secret sauce behind the company's remarkable achievements. Her strategic leadership, technical expertise, and ability to translate Elon Musk's ambitious visions into reality have been instrumental in SpaceX's rapid growth and success. Under her leadership, SpaceX has expanded exponentially, boasting a workforce of over 13,000 employees and achieving billions of dollars in revenue annually over more than 2 decades of development. This growth trajectory underscores Shotwell's managerial prowess and strategic acumen, ensuring SpaceX's sustained trajectory toward innovation and excellence in the aerospace industry. Most notable is her contribution to the Starship program. The Starship rocket has been growing at a breakneck pace so far, as it prepares to embark on its 5th test flight, marking the first time it has been caught by the giant Mechazilla tower. When mentioning Starship's success, many people immediately think about the technical achievement, but a factor that is not less important is finance. Begun in 2012, Musk estimated that the Starship program would cost between $5 billion and $10 billion to develop. This year alone, SpaceX planned to pump some $2 billion into a rocket system. You should forget or should not forget that SpaceX lost $968 million in 2021 and $559 million in 2022. The company just earned a tiny profit of $55 million in Q1 2023. It is no doubt that Starship has made a large hole in the company's budget. Of course, even though Musk is the richest person in the world, he cannot pay Starship's expensive bills alone. So, as the president and bestseller, what did Gwynne Shotwell do to make SpaceX last and grow dramatically for more than 20 years? The revenue for the company primarily comes from the rocket launch service, under commercial contracts with national organizations like NASA, private companies, and individuals. Shotwell was responsible for leading the effort to build the Falcon vehicle manifest to over 50 launches, generating $5 billion in revenue. This included a commercial connection to the International Space Station for resupplying services, where they were able to deliver cargo and supplies to the astronauts. Additionally, she has been a strong advocate for SpaceX's cost-cutting approach through the reusability of rocket parts. Under her guidance, SpaceX achieved significant milestones, including the first successful landing of an orbital rocket's first stage and the reflight of used rockets, which have become hallmarks of the company's operational efficiency. To maximize the revenue sources, Gwynne has come up with a clever and efficient business strategy called residual capability. SpaceX's main technology is rocketry, and Gwynne has come up with the idea to expand to other areas, such as Starlink satellite and Dragon spacecraft, and utilize SpaceX's rocket to launch them. Although neither of them does service directly to Mars colonization, at least could create a sustainable business on Earth and help build technology that will be needed on Mars. However, to survive in a market that has been monopolized by legacy space companies for a long time, SpaceX will find it difficult to develop without support from national agencies like NASA. Of course, everything was not easy in its early days. As Elon shared, there was a massive effort to block SpaceX from providing astronaut transport for NASA. That is where Gwynne Shotwell's exceptional negotiating comes in. Can't help but mention her top-notch sales skills in negotiating contracts with the tycoons in the aerospace industry. An interesting thing is that when Shotwell was a new member of SpaceX, she soon became the head of business development and was immediately assigned an unbelievable task by her boss, selling some rockets that did not exist and had not flown before, of course. She began meeting with the United States government agencies and satellite companies to begin to persuade them to book launches on their still unflown Falcon 1 rocket. Somehow, the then-young unicorn SpaceX landed its first contracts with agencies such as the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, a Malaysian satellite startup, and above all with a large national organization, NASA, not to mention a dozen Falcon 1 flights to other clients. All this happened before it ever reaching orbit. She is also the bridge for the long-term close cooperation between SpaceX and NASA. To be honest, during his time as a senator, Bill Nelson's relationship with SpaceX was not good. His opposition was primarily aimed at Musk's eccentric ways and volatile behavior as the lead of a company that that could potentially have a global impact. Nelson was tapped to lead NASA in 2021, and so far, his cautious attitude toward Elon remains. This is because Elon Musk's decision-making has come under a lot of scrutiny in recent years regarding some of his other companies, X and Tesla. Take, for example, in October 2022, when Elon Musk made a tumultuous Twitter takeover, Nelson feared that this could affect SpaceX's operation. And the first person he immediately thought of was not Elon Musk, but instead SpaceX's president and COO, Gwynne Shotwell. A few months after Musk bought Twitter, though before he renamed it X, in late 2022, Nelson recounted to NBC News his relief when discussing the acquisition with the SpaceX president. "Tell me that the distraction that Elon might have on Twitter is not going to affect SpaceX." Nelson recounted to NBC News that he asked Gwynne Shotwell. "I assure you, it is not," Shotwell responded. According to Nelson, "You have nothing to worry about." He also emphasized that the encounter ended up friendly because he knows Shotwell, not Musk, is running SpaceX. "I hugged her with a smile on my face because I know she is running that thing. She's running SpaceX," Nelson said. Asked whether he has any concerns about SpaceX, Nelson said, "No, I don't." Unlike a lot of other SpaceX employees who grew up fascinated by rockets, she wasn't. Born in Chicago, she is the child of an artist and a brain surgeon. Per her mother, she wanted her to become an engineer, but Shotwell thought those people just drove trains. So, to help her daughter understand what they do, her mother took her to a Society of Women Engineers event. For the first time, she met female engineers, and the beautiful suits they wore fascinated her so much that she wanted to one day become a mechanical engineer like them. Her educational journey started with Northwestern, where Shotwell studied mechanical engineering with a minor in economics, as well as a master's degree in applied mathematics. Her original plan was to work in the auto industry, and began working for the Chrysler Corporation in engine research, a job she initially enjoyed but later found tiring with its many levels of highs of approvals and rules limiting productivity and innovation. She then moved to Aerospace Corp for 10 years to learn the business of defense contractors, where she was a thermal engineer and project manager. However, one more time she asked the question about the meaning of work, as the hands-on experience here could not keep up with her expectations. She felt like she was just suffering papers. To get more hands-on experience building and designing rockets, she moved to Microcosm, a small space startup whose mission was to design and build low-cost rockets and parts. In a typical environment like a startup company, where you have the opportunity to learn many things, experience a lot of practice, and maximize your creativity, Shotwell learned possibly the most important lessons that would benefit her later at SpaceX. On the fly, she learned about business development, including management skills, and how to sell aerospace products to the government and large companies. With her talent and efforts, she is widely known as the best saleswoman. Parallel to this, Elon Musk was in the early stages of developing SpaceX, a revolutionary and potential company in the aerospace industry. Like lots of other founders who hire adult supervision, when their companies start to grow, SpaceX's founders needed a business development talent who knew what they were doing as an engineer. Through a meeting at a fateful party, Elon truly found treasure, and then he convinced Shotwell successfully to become the employee number 7 in his young company, SpaceX. On the 10th of October, 1967, the Outer Space Treaty entered into force, definitely manifesting human desire for space exploration and activities to transcend national interests, political agendas, and conflicts. The treaty establishes space as the province of all mankind, promoting peaceful exploration and prohibiting the appropriation of celestial bodies by any one nation. Notably, the treaty came just 6 months after the most tragic space accident of the Cold War, which witnessed the Vladimir Komarov cosmonaut fall from space, making him the first human to die in a space flight. His death was deemed caused by the Soviets' vain impatience in developing Soyuz 1 against the 10-manned Gemini space missions the U.S. launched between 1965 and 1966. Komarov's terrible death also clearly depicts the aftermath of intertwining pure space exploration with political motivations. Despite a clear awareness of the harmful effects of politicizing space, at present some regulatory bodies like the FAA still impose bureaucratic delays that some argue are retaliation against individuals with political conflicts of interest with them and their parties. Elon Musk, the founder and CEO of SpaceX, has been famous recently for supporting Donald Trump. It's likely the root cause for the significant regulatory hurdles that his rocket company SpaceX has faced. And this, in Elon's own words, is smothering America. America is being smothered by legions of regulators, often inept and politically driven. However, the idea of targeting SpaceX just to punish Elon is a misguided one. While Elon Musk is widely recognized as the founder and driving force behind SpaceX, it is important to acknowledge that the company is not solely possessed by him. Elon Musk himself also affirms that he just owns about 40% of SpaceX. The remaining ownership is distributed among various institutional investors and early team members, including notable stakeholders like Alphabet, Google's parent company, which holds around 7.5% of the company. Therefore, any action that hinders SpaceX's development is a violation of the law, unfairly punishing the legitimate interests of other shareholders. Additionally, while Musk's ownership stake is considerable, it is important to recognize that SpaceX is a collaborative effort involving many talented engineers and executives who contribute to its success. When Musk founded SpaceX in 2002, he was joined by several key engineers and early employees, such as Tom Mueller, who was responsible for developing rocket engines, and Gwynne Shotwell, who became the company's president and COO. Afterward, in April 2023, SpaceX hired former NASA human spaceflight chief Kathy Lueders to take over as a general manager of the company's Starbase facility in South Texas, where the development of the giant Starship deep space transportation system is centered. In this position, she reports directly to SpaceX President and Chief Operating Officer Gwynne Shotwell. Since then, Elon Musk has seemed less active in providing updates on Starship's operations, demonstrating a major reorganization, where Elon no longer holds a key role in the premier center for the Starship mega rocket. In this way, he can focus on his other company's projects. To be honest, it's not the first time a significant reorganization has been undergone in SpaceX's Texas. In 2022, there was a notice that SpaceX President and CEO Gwynne Shotwell and Vice President Mark Juncosa, two of the most influential executives at the company, would oversee the facility and operations of the company's Starbase location. Both of them seemingly stepped in for Elon Musk, as the CEO shifted his focus to Twitter, meaning that Elon Musk would step back from some of his day-to-day at this spaceport. Twitter by then was in a precarious position after the Tesla CEO and SpaceX founder had purchased the social media platform for an inflated price of $44 billion, saddling it with immense debt. The immediate implementation of far-reaching changes, or threats of changes, scared off existing advertisers, slashing the company's already tenuous revenue, and Musk himself admitted that the company as it stood was losing billions of dollars per year and could face bankruptcy if its plan to charge a subscription for a verification badge, a service that was, in theory, previously free, was not highly successful. Musk's plan at that time was to appoint Gwynne Shotwell to officially assume oversight of the company's Starship program and Starbase facilities. Additionally, SpaceX CEO Mark Juncosa, an engineer who had successfully led the Starlink program since Musk fired several cautious CEOs in 2018, has assumed technical leadership of the Starship program in the summer of 2022. For that reason, the FAA targeting Elon Musk through SpaceX is a wrong strategy, since, in fact, they are actually attacking those like Kathy Lueders, Gwynne Shotwell, Mark Juncosa, and thousands of other workers. They all work day and night to serve the national interest, including NASA's Artemis program. Starship's early test flights played a vital role in making the rocket reliable as soon as possible and allowed SpaceX and NASA to test more complex technology, such as in-space refueling, required to make the Artemis lunar landings possible. In the long-distant future, once the gigantic rocket is able to carry humans to the moon, America will have more opportunity to win China in the new space race. China aims to land its astronauts on the moon by 2030, and NASA Administrator Bill Nelson wants U.S. astronauts to return to the lunar surface first. However, given the delay of Artemis due to hardware readiness and the red tape, it would be hard for that dream to come true. We all want to see America triumph again in this century, but we don't want to see any more accidents caused by the go fever approach. Of course, SpaceX has ramped up itself to keep up with that goal, and the FAA as well as the government should highly estimate the company's effort and desire. Unfortunately, another move of the FAA and the government even makes things much more complicated, as they are also irresponsible in protecting the rights of private U.S. companies, typically SpaceX in another country. You probably won't forget the story of Starlink in August, as a Brazilian Supreme Court Justice, Alexandre de Moraes, blocked the financial accounts of Starlink in Brazil. For those who don't know, he and U.S. tech billionaire Elon Musk have a months-long feud over content moderation on X in Brazil. Ramirez has ordered certain accounts suspended for allegedly spreading disinformation, which Musk has challenged as censorship. More ridiculously, while their conflict just relates to X, Brazil's Supreme Court has blocked the bank accounts of Elon Musk's Starlink services. Tech lawyer Preston Byrne wrote on X, "This is some really lawless stuff coming out of Brazil. SpaceX is not Elon Musk. He has about half the cap table. The rest is owned by private investors." He also criticized the U.S. government's irresponsibility in protecting the rights of private U.S. companies. If the U.S. government were doing its job, it would use diplomacy to put a stop to this overnight. This resulted in SpaceX's latest movement in early September, when satellite-based internet service provider Starlink backtracked and said it would accept and enforce a Brazilian Supreme Court justice's order to block the Elon Musk billionaire's social media platform, X, regardless of the illegal treatment of Starlink in freezing our assets. "We are complying with the order to block access to X in Brazil," the company statement said. "We continue to pursue all legal avenues, as are others who agree that Alexandra's recent order violate the Brazilian constitution." Musk has been relentlessly posting in recent days, lambasting Ramirez as a criminal. "This evil tyrant is a disgrace to judges' robes," Musk wrote on X, alongside a photo of Ramirez, some 17 hours before Starlink announced its decision to comply with the order. Of course, the tension between SpaceX and the FAA isn't new. On X, SpaceX previously shared its grievances. For nearly 2 years, SpaceX has voiced its concerns with the FAA's inability to keep pace with the commercial spaceflight industry. It is clear that the agency lacks the resources to timely review licensing materials, but also focuses its limited resources on areas unrelated to public safety. These distractions continue to directly threaten national priority and undercut American industry's ability to innovate. Clearly, these fierce acts of resistance by SpaceX are just a question of time before the company loses patience with the U.S. national agency. This ultimately has forced SpaceX to go to court with the FAA. SpaceX will be filing suit against the FAA for regulatory overreach. Elon tweeted on September 17th, "Suing means that SpaceX will go through the discovery process with the FAA, which means their lawyers get to look at a lot of internal material, like internal communications. They are doing this because they hope to uncover evidence of political lobbying against SpaceX. I am highly confident that discovery will show improper, politically motivated behavior by the FAA," he said. The tool allowing the FAA to delay the Starship Flight 5 is the Part 450 regulation, which went into effect in March 2021. SpaceX and other commercial spaceflight companies have faced licensing delays due to this regulatory framework. Dave Cavassa, president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, criticized the system, saying, "The way it is being implemented today has caused severe licensing delays, confusion, and is jeopardizing our long-held leadership position." Cavassa emphasized that the process is taking years and that companies are getting stuck in an endless back-and-forth process. These delays pose a real threat to the U.S.'s standing in the global space race, as other nations, particularly China, continue to make strides in their own space programs. And that just about wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. In my eyes, there is a commonality between the two organizations, Boeing and the FAA, in the way they do their jobs. It sounds like they are too far from their core value. Boeing, as a technical company, prioritizes profit over quality and professional skills. The FAA was established to serve the public interest, but has allowed personal political interests to hinder the common progress of humanity. So if the best solution to Boeing's problem is to change leadership, I think the FAA should too. Apparently, there was a shady handshake between the two companies' leaders behind the scenes, and this led to a series of confusing events, most notably, as Elon revealed, amazingly, no Starliner fines for Boeing. The FAA Space Division is harassing SpaceX about nonsense that doesn't affect safety while giving a free pass to Boeing even after NASA concluded that their spacecraft was not safe enough to bring back the astronauts. There need to be resignations from the FAA leadership. In the tweet, the SpaceX CEO also agreed that the FAA really needs a staff overhaul, but did not mention exactly who should be sacked. Fast forward to his latest tweet on September 25th. The very first name is mentioned, FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker. He needs to resign, Musk tweeted. Musk's statement originated from the Tuesday hearing, where the FAA chief made a fool of himself by blatantly lying about SpaceX to Congress. Ridiculously, he requires SpaceX to operate at the highest level of safety, but his agency is acting like a 19th century bureaucracy with 21st century pettiness. The FAA is delaying SpaceX's most important flight test at present just to consult on minor paperwork updates relating to previously approved non-safety issues that have already been determined to have zero environmental impact. The blatant lie from the manager of a major national agency even made Repa Kevin Kiley, who directly questioned him during a hearing on Tuesday, quite annoying. FAA Administrator Whitaker made a number of false statements in his testimony about SpaceX. Either he doesn't know what's going on at his agency, or he deliberately deceived Congress, Kevin Kiley wrote in a September 25th tweet with a photo showing his letter to the FAA chief. So, how about you? Do you think that with perceived failures in managing the agency effectively, FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker deserves to say goodbye to his chair? Please comment "resign" if you agree. Another problem of the FAA is staffing shortages. Last year, SpaceX multiple times complained about how working with the FAA slowed down the company's progress, not just on the development of the Starship program, but on innovations with the Falcon 9 and Dragon programs as well. To excuse this, the FAA said they needed significantly more people working in its licensing department, and should be encouraged to prioritize missions of national importance. There are about nearly 45,000 staff to oversee and manage the national airspace system in the FAA, 3 times SpaceX's workforce of about 13,000 employees. Okay, I know that the FAA's amount of work is very huge, as they are responsible for regulating all aspects of civil aviation in the US. However, despite tons of work and limited employees, the FAA still has enough resources to take care of little things on SpaceX's rocket that, are unrelated to public safety. Interestingly, in their recent response to NASA spaceflight, the FAA even has problems with Starship's new heat tile. What the hell? A proposal to conduct a return to the launch site for the booster, if the FAA has not previously evaluated and authorized it for prior flights, is a change that is material to public safety. A change of a vehicle's thermal protection system, TPS, may be a material change if the TPS is a safety-critical system or component that could affect public safety. In the FAA's eyes, a new TPS could absolutely be a threat to public safety. But as my observation, picking up a complete heat shield after a Starship launch is often a blessing for many. Currently, there is a lucrative secondary market for unique souvenirs that were once attached to some of the largest human-made objects to ever take flight, and Starship's recovered ceramic heat shield tiles are selling for thousands of dollars on eBay. Gosh, I don't think anyone's happiness is a safety concern for the FAA. In addition to the heat shield, the FAA also supposes that a change in the launch site, re-entry site, or other landing site could be a material to public safety. It sounds like the FAA is so sensitive that if the ship splashes down in the middle of the ocean where there are no people, they would easily panic. America is being smothered by ever larger mountains of irrational regulations from ever more new agencies that serve no purpose apart from the aggrandizement of bureaucrats. Elon Musk shares his thoughts on the FAA's latest announcement. Humanity and life as we know it are doomed to extinction without significant regulatory reform. We need to become a multi-planet civilization and a spacefaring species. This is my absolute showstopper for why Kamala and the giant government machine that is her legion of puppet masters cannot win, Trump or doom. This is the fork in the road of destiny. Despite the FAA's efforts to thwart it, SpaceX is quietly moving toward its ambitious goals. With roughly 13,000 employees, the company has done many incredible things, pushing the boundary of the human spirit and making the greatest barrier to space exploration just office paperwork. The upcoming Starship Flight 5 will witness SpaceX's bold plan to catch Super Heavy with tower chopsticks become a reality. According to SpaceX engineers have spent years preparing and months testing for the booster catch attempt on Flight 5, with technicians pouring tens of thousands of hours into building the infrastructure to maximize our chances for success. The firm began constructing the Starship launch tower at its Starbase facility in South Texas in 2021. The launch tower was fully stacked by late July 2021, when a crane lifted the 9th and final large steel section to the top of the tower at the orbital launch site. The launch mount, Stage 0, began construction in July 2020. Since then, SpaceX has spent a lot of time and effort developing and perfecting the system. And with each Starship test flight, Mechazilla becomes more and more advanced, most notably the installation of a water deluge system to protect the launch pad against the frenzied power of Super Heavy's 33 Raptor engines. To prepare for the first catch attempt, in recent months, technicians have conducted numerous tests to ensure that the chopsticks can effectively catch the booster. This includes practicing lifting the booster to expected heights and simulating various scenarios to maximize the chances of success during the actual catch attempt. The effort involved in preparing for this catch attempt has required tens of thousands of hours from engineers and technicians. This commitment reflects SpaceX's focus on innovation and efficiency in rocket reusability, which is central to its mission of making space travel more sustainable. Mentioning the upcoming special mission, Elon Musk proudly shared that the largest flying object ever made will be caught in midair with giant Mechazilla arms. SpaceX says the Super Heavy booster and Starship upper stage for the next launch have been ready to launch since the first week of August. Previously, they were targeting the mid-September timeframe that the FAA had also targeted to determine whether to approve a launch license for the next Starship flight. Unfortunately, many people are using their dislike of Elon Musk as a person to try to hold back all SpaceX efforts toward the fifth flight and perhaps the company's long-term ambitions. September 28th was a memorable milestone not only for SpaceX enthusiasts, but for the entire space industry. This day 16 years ago marked the first successful Falcon 1 launch after 3 failures, which is also the first successful orbital launch of a privately funded and developed, fully liquid-propelled carrier rocket. Thanks to this success, SpaceX has made a breakthrough to save itself from the brink of bankruptcy, paving the way for a new era of commercial spaceflight. Fast forward to 2024, and space exploration has once again reached a new milestone since, under the Crew 9 mission, SpaceX Falcon 9 launched a NASA astronaut and Russian cosmonaut to the ISS from a historic Cape Canaveral pad. It was the first ever astronaut launch from SLC-40, SpaceX's first Florida launch pad, which has seen many uncrewed launches over the years. SpaceX and NASA spent 2 years upgrading the pad with a new crew launch tower, access arm, and emergency escape slide to prepare it for astronaut flights. Simultaneously, Crew 9 was the 15th crewed launch by SpaceX, including the 8 previous ISS crew rotation missions, Demo 2 test flight for NASA, 3 private astronaut missions to the ISS for Axiom Space, and the Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn private missions. Unlike 14 previous missions, the 9th crewed Dragon mission has a very special meaning, which is to rescue 2 stranded NASA astronauts, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, who flew to the station on Boeing's CST-100 Starliner in June. The mission's Dragon capsule, named Freedom, ferried just 2 people to the ISS instead of the usual 4, leaving 2 seats for Butch and Suni on the trip back down to Earth in February 2025. Frankly, the 2 empty seats on Dragon were another reminder of how badly Boeing had botched the commercial crew contract and of SpaceX's stunning victory over a company with more than 100 years of history. Since then, the old space's dominance era has indeed receded to make way for the strong rise of the new space with SpaceX as its representative. More broadly, this mission marked peaceful cooperation between the Americans and the Russians to rescue 2 American astronauts. This happens despite disruptions on the Earth's surface, demonstrating the apolitical nature of space exploration and promising a future of only peace and unity in service of the noble goals of humanity. What an auspicious day, folks. Given such a great day, it would be hard for a retired astronaut who was the first Canadian to perform extravehicular activity in outer space to hide his emotion. On X, Chris Hadfield shared that, "Very good to see Suni and Butch's ride home. Safely docked to the space station now for the next 6 months. So much work to do up there. Well done, SpaceX and NASA." His tweet is attached to a 4K video showing Dragon docking to the ISS. In response, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk wrote, "It's real, but looks like CGI. Williams and Wilmore should have been on an 8-day trip to the ISS instead of going to last 8 months unless there were significant problems with the Boeing craft that delivered them." So far, they have been staying in space for over 3 months and are counting down the days until next February. That will come at some personal cost. Williams's fall plans have included spending time with her elderly mother, while Wilmore noted that he would miss most of his younger daughter's senior year of high school. Both astronauts are expected to be able to cast ballots from space for the upcoming presidential election in the United States. Despite of difficulties, the stranded astronauts are still stoic. "We are pushing the edges of the envelope in everything that we do. do, and it is not easy, Mission Commander Butch Wilmore said in a Space-to-Earth call with the media on September 13th. It's not an easy thing to do, but that's not why we do it. Maybe we do it because it's hard. We're both Navy. We've both been on deployments, Williams, the mission's pilot, said. We're not surprised when deployments get changed, Williams added. Honestly, they'll have plenty to keep them busy on the International Space Station. Wilmore and Williams have integrated as part of the team on board the space station, which means they're performing routine maintenance tasks and conducting science experiments daily. Maintenance of the space station is an ongoing operation for astronauts on board, according to Terry Virts, a former NASA astronaut and commander of the space station. The station has all kinds of systems that make it possible for humans to survive in space but need repairs and maintenance. Fans, air conditioners, electronic communications equipment, carbon dioxide removal systems, and the list goes on. In addition, they conduct experiments to find ways to overcome a lack of gravity in water plants. Given the deep experience that each brings to their role, including extensive previous time in space, the ISS's operations will likely be the better for it. Unfortunately, that leads to a large problem for NASA. After throwing multi-billion dollars out the window and steadfast in his stubbornness in maintaining the contract with Boeing, it's still unclear what value the space agency is getting from the Boeing Starliner project. The main goal of having two operational vehicles in parallel has completely failed. 10 years since NASA awarded SpaceX and Boeing for the commercial crew contract, only SpaceX Dragon has been able to regularly ferry astronauts to and from the ISS under contract. Meanwhile, Boeing's Calypso Starliner spacecraft has been in the testing phase. Oh my God! Its first test in 2019 without a crew aboard ended up in the wrong orbit and missed the ISS. Its 2022 redo uncovered more problems and a repair bill that was reported to top $1 billion. In total, Starliner's losses have totaled nearly $1.6 billion since the program began, and that doesn't include the cost of fixing problems encountered during this mission. The space failure is just one part of the larger picture of Boeing's downfall in recent years. On the key field of commercial airplanes, Boeing has had several catastrophes, including two Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes that crashed, one in 2018 and another in 2019, killing 346 people. This has cost the company more than $2.5 billion in settlements. And the January 2024 incident witnessed a door plug blow off of a Boeing 737 MAX 9 jet just moments after takeoff, forcing an emergency landing. Subsequently, the FAA grounded all of the MAX 9 planes for nearly 3 weeks, resulting in a serious loss in the firm's business activities. The company is also mired in a labor negotiation with more than 30,000 workers who walked out last week and is attempting risky cost cuts at the same time. As of early September, Boeing stock reported a reduction of 7% per day, faring worse than its peer Airbus, which was down 4%. The financial downturn has led Boeing to the vital questions. What is the path forward for the Boeing Starliner program? Should they cancel the program? You know, the Calypso's performance in the CFT is too bad that NASA hasn't ruled out the possibility of one more test flight to certify the vehicle. At that point, Boeing could cost about $400 million, based on charges the company booked to redo an earlier test flight. To make matters even more complicated, the ISS will retire in the 2030 and perhaps until Starliner gets a human rating certification, which could take a long time. NASA will struggle to arrange a suitable schedule for Starliner's missions to the ISS alongside Dragon's busy schedule. Despite the uncertain future, NASA has raised a high determination to keep the program, which is proven through Bill Nelson's absolute confidence. 100% sure Starliner would fly astronauts again. Ortberg voiced support for continuing the Starliner program after the craft is sent back from the space station without people on board, according to Nelson. He expressed to me an intention that they will continue to work the problems once Starliner is back safely, and that we will have our redundancy and our crewed access to the space station. On September 28th, Crew 9, the 9th operational SpaceX astronaut launch to the ISS, is set to launch for a half-year mission. However, they will fly with only 2 astronauts instead of 4. The other 2 seats need to be reserved for 2 NASA astronauts on the ISS right now. Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, who were unable to use Boeing's Starliner spacecraft to fly home as planned. Subsequently, next February at the mission's end, Dragon Freedom will haul NASA's Butch and Suni back down to Earth. Shifting to SpaceX to bring the astronauts home manifests NASA's commitment to their core value, safety. And so the decision to keep Butch and Suni aboard the International Space Station and bring the Boeing Starliner home uncrewed is a result of a commitment to safety. Bill Nelson, NASA administrator, said, "It is also a tacit affirmation of the great trust that NASA has in its most reliable partner, SpaceX." In an interesting interview between Bill Nelson and Axios, you can see that the reporter is blatantly asking Bill Nelson some steering questions that seem to be certainly against Elon Musk and trying to get him to make negative comments about SpaceX. But instead, he praised SpaceX and then gave her a bitter ending.
Right, and I think it's not necessarily how SpaceX is run, as you're saying. I'm just talking about the distraction of the constant headlines about him, and if you all feel like that's a distraction.
Well, they distract you, but they don't distract NASA.
Nice. However, in another world, specifically during the Transportation Committee hearing on September 24th, FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker declared that SpaceX is clearly not the safest, most reliable launch provider, as NASA indirectly recognized. This statement was used to defend the latest fine and delay to SpaceX rockets. In Whitaker's own words, SpaceX has been a very innovative company, but they're also a mature company. Thus, they need to operate at the highest level of safety, like Boeing. I think Boeing and SpaceX should have the same oversight. They should all have SMS, safety management systems. They should all have whistleblower programs, he said. Whitaker, less than a year into his new position, admitted that the FAA's previous approach to Boeing was too hands-off and in reactive mode, rather than taking a proactive approach with inspections. The FAA is on track to reach its target of adding 55 inspectors to Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems facilities by the end of the year, according to Whitaker, who estimated the agency has thus far hired between 40 and 50 inspectors. These inspectors have on average 20 years experience in the industry, he added. Boeing and Spirit, a 737 supplier in Wichita, Kansas, opened the factories to inspectors in the immediate aftermath of the Alaska Airlines incident. That doesn't mean SpaceX should be subject to such strict regulations, however, almost as if the regulatory requirements for an airliner carrying hundreds of passengers should be different from the regulatory requirements for an unmanned rocket carrying absolutely no one. Clear the launch range and there are no safety concerns whatsoever. Oh, the hot staging ring is going to fall? Okay, clear the area where it's going to fall into. Done. Safety guaranteed. You don't need to restart the licensing process. It's a simple amendment. One user on Reddit wrote, "The regulatory requirements for crewed launches are understandably more stringent due to the inherent risks associated with carrying human passengers. In contrast, unmanned missions, such as those used for satellite launches or cargo missions, may have different safety considerations since there are no lives at stake. The FAA and other regulatory bodies assess risks based on the potential consequences of a failure. For unmanned missions, the risk assessment may prioritize environmental impacts and property damage over human safety, which can lead to different regulatory requirements. Another factor to consider regarding the regulatory framework is the profile of the launch unit. At this point, there is a huge contrast between SpaceX and Boeing. While troubled planmaker Boeing is notorious for plane crashes and spacecraft failures to bring astronauts home, SpaceX has proudly become the most reliable and safest vehicle launcher in the world. Guess who launched 429,125 kilograms of spacecraft up mass in the first quarter of 2024, beating everyone else, domestic and international combined? Guess who regularly flies NASA astronauts to and from the ISS over the course of 4 years? Since 2020, SpaceX has expanded its fleet of Crew Dragon spacecraft from 1 to 4 and tallied up 10 missions for NASA under the Commercial Crew Program. In addition, their spacecraft has multiple times set records, including Inspiration 4, the first fully commercial spaceflight, Axiom 1, the first fully commercial mission to the ISS, and most recently Polaris Dawn, which reached the highest orbit of the planet flown by a manned spacecraft to date. The successful Polaris mission has marked the first commercial spacewalk, breaking the boundary of human exploration. Only companies that prioritize safety and innovation can do such great things, and it would be absurd for great companies like SpaceX to be placed on the same level as poor Boeing just because of confusing FAA regulations. Bill Nelson and the whole NASA are also not bungling fools when they choose SpaceX as the familiar partner for important national missions. They don't also lose their mind when turning to SpaceX Dragon to bring Butch and Suni home rather than Boeing Starliner. Apparently, the FAA chief is fully aware of all of that, and what he said to Congress at the hearing is just a very vague explanation. He had no real answer, and those he gave were false or misleading. This is a targeted and political work stoppage designed to punish SpaceX for reasons unrelated to public safety. Both Elon Musk's SpaceX and Repa Kevin Kiley pushed back against his testimony, claiming every statement he made about the aerospace company's alleged safety violations was incorrect. One of the fines has to do with SpaceX's relocation of a fuel farm at its launch pad at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Whitaker alleged SpaceX moved it closer to the population and did not do a risk analysis before launching. SpaceX said that that location is more than twice the distance from the nearest publicly accessible area, and they provided the FAA with all required analysis. The company has strongly disputed Whitaker's comments about SpaceX violating regulations. SpaceX was fully licensed to conduct these Falcon launches, and FAA has not alleged otherwise. FAA has not alleged SpaceX was not permitted or not licensed to launch these missions. SpaceX receives FAA licensing for all missions, subject to the Commercial Space Launch Act, they added. Regarding the delay of the Starship flight due to non-compliance with launch licensing procedures, SpaceX affirmed that SpaceX did not violate state law because they have a permit for deluge operation from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ. Talking about sonic boom analysis as a safety-related incident, SpaceX denies that neither of the two items he referenced, including the sonic boom, is related to public safety, but to environmental considerations that had been previously evaluated as posing no risk to the environment. Elon Musk, SpaceX's founder and CEO, has pointed his finger at a political motive for the FAA's scrutiny of SpaceX. By endorsing former President Donald Trump in this year's presidential election, Elon Musk and his companies have become targets of retaliation. America is being smothered by legions of regulators, often inept and politically driven, Musk wrote on X, referring to the FAA. This skepticism increasingly became more obvious when the FAA deliberately pushed Starship Flight 5 before late November, whereas the national election is set to be held on early month. Based on the arguments presented, it can be inferred that a form of justice that SpaceX actually seeks is the government's support for true space exploration missions, an appropriate punishment for incompetent companies that may compromise public safety. It's not about the way the FAA has applied for SpaceX recently. Space is inherently dangerous to human beings, and spaceflight is too risky. But it doesn't mean space travel is just spent for professional astronauts and legacy companies. The rapid growth of the unicorn SpaceX, who is the pioneer for the private crewed spaceflights, is the obvious proof of that. However, great things always come with challenges, and one of the biggest challenges that SpaceX has faced is the safety matter. You know, in this field, even a small negligence can lead to terrible consequences that last not only in a short time, but can last for years. It's a reason why SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell said astronaut and personnel safety is SpaceX's highest priority. This is reflected in the way they make their already reliable Dragon spacecraft more reliable every day. Recently, NASA's Steve Stitch revealed a new Dragon contingency, the Crew Dragon's propulsive emergency landing capabilities. We have a unique capability for the first time on Crew 8 and Crew 9. It's an emergency contingency capability for landing, where if the main parachutes were all to fail, the Super Draco thrusters will fire right before the vehicle would make contact with the water, and then it would be an emergency configuration to save the crew on a really bad day. 8 powerful Super Draco thrusters used in this case are normally only used in the unlikely instance of a launch abort. Steve Stitch, NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager, said the emergency propulsive landing capability will be enabled for the return of the Crew 8 mission, which has been at the space station since March. Adding details about the new emergency landing capabilities, SpaceX's William Gerstenmaier shared that we've actually flown it on several other Dragon flights before this. This is the first time it flies on a NASA mission. He outlined that the way it works is, in the case all the parachutes totally fail, this essentially fires the thrusters at the very end that essentially gives the crew a chance to land safely and essentially escape the vehicle. So it's not used in any, partial conditions. Since the Dragon can land with one chute out, we can land with other failures in the chute system. The system works when the capsule detects that there's a problem, and it fires essentially the Draco thrusters at the very end, and then provides a tolerable landing through the crew. So it's a true deep contingency, outlined Gerstenmaier. This news is certainly able to fire any SpaceX enthusiastic up who has followed SpaceX long enough to know that the plans for powered Dragon landings were dropped 7 years ago. With it brought back from the dead, is there anything exciting waiting for us in the future? But before answering the question, we should find out why they need a backup option for their landing procedure. SpaceX has stuck to the parachute-assisted ocean splashdowns since the Dragon 1 era, and now this approach has become the best selection for Dragon landing. But that doesn't mean there are no risks. Parachutes on spacecraft can be prone to failure for several reasons, despite decades of experience with their use in aerospace applications. It might be from external factors such as aerodynamic forces, wake turbulence, and varying descent speeds appearing in a highly dynamic and chaotic environment as the spacecraft descends. These can affect how parachutes inflate and stabilize, not to mention the technical failures in design and assembling. Compared to the complex technology packed into a modern spacecraft, you would think the simple parachute would be the easiest part of the design, but in fact, it's one of the biggest challenges. Parachutes, they look easy, but they are definitely not easy. Elon Musk said at a 2019 press conference at SpaceX, "We've had so many engineers quit over the parachutes." Another risk regards cutter failures, where lines controlling parachute expansion do not cut as intended and can prevent proper inflation. For example, in Blue Origin's NS-25 mission on May 19th flight, one parachute failed to fully inflate because a controlling line was not severed correctly. Even over time, materials used in parachutes can experience wear and tear, leading to potential failures during deployment. SpaceX's Dragon capsule met the parachute's issues during a drop test in April 2019, when it had to crash land in the Nevada desert because 3 main parachutes didn't inflate. Both Boeing Starliner and Blue Origin's New Shepard also hit the parachute's issue. Of course, SpaceX is afraid of such incidents happening again on its safest spacecraft, so they came up with the idea of using Super Dracos for redundancy, but with a little bit of modification compared to the past idea. SpaceX initially planned for the Crew Dragon spacecraft to utilize propulsive landings using its Super Draco engines, which would allow for a controlled landing on solid ground. However, this concept was ultimately scrapped primarily due to the safety concern. NASA did not accept the propulsive landing as safe enough, at least not without a lot more tests. Also, the landing legs would have extended out from the bottom through the heat shield, which could be a failure point for the heat shield. Therefore, the use of the Super Dracos to soften a water landing, as we see now, seemed very sensible. By remaining the splashdown approach, SpaceX doesn't need an additional part like landing legs that will add weight to the spacecraft and make a hole in the spacecraft's bottom. More importantly, the benefits of propulsive landing systems over traditional parachute landings are significant, such as more precise control over the landing, so minimizing the impact forces experienced by the spacecraft. On the other hand, some raise skepticism about its feasibility because NASA hasn't certified it. Perhaps we will need more testing here, which is not simple. Anyway, it would be great to reuse a safety system for a different purpose in addition to the launch escape system. It shows SpaceX's strong commitment to human safety, thus reaffirming its position as the world's most reliable and safest vehicle launcher. Also, this makes us think NASA has come around a bit and decided that the thing it was originally designed to do can be used as an emergency backup. This is an interesting development considering how averse NASA is to trying new things, even if it's a 1% of a 1% of a 1% chance. Talking about this interesting idea, SpaceX's CEO Elon Musk wrote on X, "If you've got it, flaunt it." Jared Isaacman, Polaris Dawn's commander, also expressed excitement. "We were always confident in the chutes, but this backup capability is pretty impressive." So how about you? Are you sold on the idea of Super Dracos assisted ocean splashdowns? Drop a heart icon in the comments section below if you are. With reconsidering the power landing idea, one wonders if this is the beginning of a pathway that leads to landing Dragon on land, similar to the original Dragon plans. My guess is no, SpaceX possibly keeps loyal to the traditional splashdown. Besides minimizing the need for the landing legs, landing in water helps absorb some of the impact, since the properties of water provide more cushion than solid ground. So far, splashing down into water remains one of the most common ways astronauts return to Earth. So, how did researchers figure out the splashdown method? Before it can perform a safe landing, a spacecraft returning to Earth needs to slow down. While it is careening back to Earth, a spacecraft has a lot of kinetic energy. Friction with the atmosphere introduces drag, which slows down the spacecraft. The friction converts the spacecraft's kinetic energy to thermal energy or heat. All this heat radiates out into the surrounding air, which gets really hot. Since re-entry velocities can be several times the speed of sound, the force of the air pushing back against the vehicle turns the vehicle's surroundings into a scorching flow up to thousands of degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, no matter how quickly this transfer happens, there's still not enough time during re-entry for the vehicle to slow down to a safe enough velocity not to crash. So, the engineers resort to other methods that can slow down a spacecraft during splashdown. Parachutes are the first option. NASA typically uses designs with bright colors, such as orange, which make them easy to spot. They're also huge, with diameters of over 100 feet, and each re-entry vehicle usually uses more than one for the best stability. Even then, the rocket can't crash against a hard surface. It needs to land somewhere that will cushion the impact. Researchers figured out early on that water makes an excellent shock absorber. Thus, splashdown was born. On October 2nd, the US Coast Guard broke breaking news that the launch date for SpaceX's Starship Flight 5 will be 6 weeks earlier than previously announced by the FAA. It means that we will likely witness the jaw-dropping performance of the mega rocket no earlier than October 12th, between 7 o'clock and 8:10 local time. Later that same day, an X account called Space Sudoer posted a photo showing reservations for NASA's WB-57 aircraft from October 13th to October 27th. This matches the schedule in the US Coast Guard notice to mariners, not MAR. For those who don't know, in the context of SpaceX's Starship testing, the WB-57 serves as a platform for collecting critical data during high-altitude test flights. The data gathered by the WB-57 can help SpaceX demonstrate compliance with FAA regulations regarding safety and environmental impacts. Both of these announcements, while unrelated to launch licenses, have excited SpaceX enthusiasts. Who knows if SpaceX can turn things around? However, the FAA immediately put the rumors to rest by reaffirming that nothing has changed here. The Starship 5 flight is not expected to take place before the end of November, and that just about wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.